This is Susan Bassey. I want to take you to an audit that I did in Monterey, California. A solo audit I did while sitting outside the Monterey courthouse. I picked up my phone, and when I saw the police officer walk by my car, I decided to film her to see what would happen. Now, this police officer was headed back to her car from the courthouse, and we were parked in the parking lot. She noticed I was filming her. She said something on her radio, and then she began to walk to my car, and I knew I would determine how this audit would go. The first thing I thought about was my camera equipment. I certainly didn't have the equipment ready that most of my cameramen have, and I wasn't as prepared as the auditors on YouTube when they'd conduct a First Amendment audit. The next thing I thought about was the Santa Clara County Family Courthouse, a courthouse that cost taxpayers $283 million to build, and from the time that it was open, a courthouse that the sheriff deputies, the lawyers, and the judges had worked overtime to try to keep me out of. I'm sorry, I'm going to need your badge number and your name if I didn't get that.
Not a problem. Same name I gave you last time.
I understand that. I'm getting it for this time.
REY.
It's REY
1712.
1712. And I want to be clear, you were ordered to keep me off the 8th floor.
That was not ordered. You tried RSVP, you got an email.
You gave her. Okay, we're done.
I just want to make... It's true. I did get an email. There was an event held in a public courthouse during the middle of the day at the noon lunch hour where private divorce attorneys were having a party with clerks, bailiffs, and judges to celebrate the retirement of Judge Mary Ann Grilly. Her retirement was newsworthy, and I had a right to be there just as much as the private attorneys, and I was threatened with trespassing when I appeared. Sure, that you're saying I'm not allowed to go on the 8th floor right now. Is that true? Or do I have the ability to go on the 8th floor?
Do you have business on the 8th floor?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact.
What's your business on the 8th floor?
And the people.
That's not.
I'm sorry? What?
Once again, Patty, stop recording. These
public servants, law enforcement officers in Santa Clara County contracted to provide security for the courthouse, were spending more time deciding how to thwart my media investigations than just simply doing their job. Touch me?
I didn't touch you.
Good. Don't touch me.
Seize your phone and ask for a search warrant. So
go ahead. So you want to seize my phone? You want to seize my phone? You know I'm a member of the media. Would you like to seize my phone when I'm telling you I am news gathering right now?
I didn't. I just.
Officer Gomez. Great, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
While Deputy Gomez is perfectly pleasant, he is the deputy that seized my phone unlawfully and broke my hand. And he is also part of a team of deputies who appear willing to violate their oath and accept unlawful, unconstitutional orders from judges to prevent protesters from talking about what's going on in our family courts.
You will not shut us down, law enforcement! Go back inside! Go back inside! We are not doing anything wrong!
And as I filmed this encounter with police officers on a public sidewalk, I could hardly believe my eyes. This is Sergeant Ray in the lead, with a piece of paper folded up. He was clearly conflicted and made several phone calls before this happened.
This is what is called Sheriff's Department harassment right here. Armed deputies, chest cameras. I will not abide by a fictitious rule. I have done nothing wrong. This is my First Amendment right. I have done nothing wrong. I am doing nothing wrong.
This is live!
I am fighting for my child.
Live!
I'm fighting for my visitation for my daughter.
I'm live on Facebook! Live on Facebook! Live on Facebook! Look at what they're doing! Just live on Facebook! What did you live on Facebook? Did you use excessive force? What do you...
And while protests were erupting all over the country for various issues, only in Santa Clara County could we find that sheriff's deputies would be used to arrest a protester on a public sidewalk who was protesting issues related to our family courts. These parents were out here together. They were protesting CPS, family court cases, and rulings that had separated them from their children. They were protesting violations of due process and divorce and custody cases being dragged out for years, where people are being sanctioned and losing their homes. And yet only in Santa Clara County, when there were protests, were there arrests and prosecutions. This man was prosecuted for over a year until I produced the video that showed there was no chance they could get a jury to convict this man of violating an order after he protested on a public sidewalk with others who were not arrested. And while it seems that everyone and their kid brother was invited to film and attend events in the new family courthouse, I was not. The sheriffs, the judges, the court clerks, and even the local attorneys were all working overtime to keep me out of this building. The local lawyers even got together and made a local rule preventing me from recording in the courthouse. They didn't tell me about the rule, but then they prosecuted me for taking that photograph on the 8th floor of a family courthouse outside the administrative offices where there are no courtrooms. There sure was a lot of police attention to not letting me in that courthouse and not letting me film in that courthouse, while others were free to film, and they did so on a regular basis.
So this is free for all right now.
Yep. Yep.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey. Oh, look, everyone's taking pictures in here. Everyone's taking pictures.
It would not be surprising if you're as confused as I am. This is a photograph I'm being prosecuted for taking. And in the same location, and even in courtrooms, there were people taking photographs of Adoption Day. And the government officials that worked for the courts were overseeing what photographs would be taken and what messages would be disseminated to the public. This is a photographer employed with the California Judicial Council. She gave me her business card. She was allowed to take photographs, and she had no idea if there was an order permitting her to do so. It would have been impossible for me to ignore that what was being reported from that courthouse was vastly different from what was going on outside that courthouse and what was being reported on YouTube about CPS, police officers, and family law cases.
Details of the abuse the children suffered at the hands of Tammy Huntsman and Gonzalo Curiel were shared during the trial. Now that the accused are facing justice, some are pointing a finger to Child Protective Services.
The children had chronic lice, flea bites, bruises, and marks. They had 9 phone calls made to their guardians, and yet there was nothing done until they were finally murdered over a bagel on Thanksgiving.
They are grossly failing in that duty. As it is right now, there are no remedies for judicial misconduct, impropriety, and abuse of power. Right now, the California legislature ordered an audit on the CJP. The CJP believes that they are above an audit. We disagree.
And long before I knew about the auditing community on YouTube, I knew about people who were protesting in the streets, trying to bring public attention to what was going on with CPS, with judges, and in our family courts, in juvenile dependency cases, and even in probate cases, where families are struggling to deal with judicial misconduct and the state bar seems to be complicit and corrupt.
Our kids are not for sale! Our kids are not for sale! Yeah, look up at that! Our kids, everybody look up at them! Look at us! Our kids are not for
I did notice that when thousands of parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, and children gathered together in the sleepy little town of Walnut Creek to protest the state bar, judges in their community, and CPS workers, that the media paid attention and the police officers backed off.
Yeah, look up at that! Our kids, everybody look up at them! Look at us! Our kids are not for sale! 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 Our kids are not for sale!
And while I had watched a man be arrested on a public sidewalk outside the Santa Clara family courthouse, I watched hundreds of protesters protesting the judges, the lawyers, CPS, and the family courts throughout the state. And all the police officers in Contra Costa County did during this protest was sit by and watch.
Step off the course. Thank you. Thank you. Answers to the courts. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe step off the sidewalk. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Keep the sidewalks open so people can come. Thank you.
Our kids are not for sale. Our kids are not for sale. Our kids are not for sale. Our kids are not for sale.
Evil has happened in the whole court system.
So as I watched that police officer walk towards my car, knowing what I had witnessed over the past 4 years, and knowing how strongly I felt about transparency when it comes to our law enforcement, I was mindful of what had happened to the people who fought together and those who had fought alone. And it was the stories where there was no transparency, in the divorce, custody, and CPS cases of people who felt alone, that compelled me the most, and that made me realize that we have an important job to bring transparency to these issues, and that we have to do that together, because doing it alone doesn't work.
If these children are being taken from parents, there's all the media attention about what's going on at the border, but this is happening in our own communities and nobody is covering it.
Evil has happened in the whole court system.
What about your relationship with your former son-in-law? I mean, he made it sound like he was going to promise to keep making sure Emily had a relationship with you, and he didn't keep that promise.
Oh, no, he didn't. Not at all. Not at all. I can't believe anyone who was educated and swore to uphold the law could be so twisted and so corrupt for the sake of money.
So as I sat in my car and I filmed the police officer, I thought of all that I had to do that day, all the interviews left to conduct, the court hearings left to attend, and the public records that I still needed to request. And I thought about the attorneys that I needed to investigate in our family courts. And I thought about the people who had fought together and those who had fought alone. And based on my training and my experience, this is what I decided to do.
Hi, officer.
Can I help you?
No, I'm just getting an address before I go over and visit an attorney.
Okay, I just want you to be careful. I don't know if you're using your computer while you're trying to drive here, because you know that's against the law too, right?
I do, yes,
okay.
Thank you.
Can you just make sure you put it down?
And for the record, I have no intention of putting it down.